All right, so first off, cosmological arguments. So basically, a cosmological argument would be looking at the cosmos, the universe, and arguing to God. So it's cosmological in the sense that we're going from the cosmos to the creator of the cosmos. So it has to do with the origin of the universe as a whole. There are different formulations of the argument. Thomas Aquinas, you guys ever heard of that guy? Thomas Aquinas, never heard of him?
The name.
Never? It's kind of like a name. Well, he's someone you should know about. I mean, it's like, if you know anything about philosophy, you should know who Plato and Aristotle are, right? If you know anything about like Christian philosophers, you should know who Aquinas, you should know who Augustine, you should know who Anselm are. I mean, if you don't know anybody else, you should know who these people are. I mean, it's...
Those names, are they English?
No, these are...
Or
these.
pronouncing them differently?
What, how would you...
I would say Augustine. I think I know.
Okay, yeah, yeah. Yeah, Saint Augustine or Augustine, yeah. Yeah, I believe the correct pronunciation is Augustine. These guys were before the Protestant Reformation. They're ancient figures. Thomas Aquinas, really the whole field, remember last week we talked about natural theology? Natural theology?
Yes.
Quiz question, what's natural theology?
Being able to see that there's a God just by looking at the world around you.
Right, be able to argue from the creation to a creator. Okay, so Saint Thomas Aquinas can really kind of be attributed as the father of natural theology. He's just an incredible mind. If you were to take a philosophy 101, you would learn Saint Thomas Aquinas. And your philosophy teacher might ridicule Christianity. He might ridicule some of the beliefs of Christianity, but one thing he's not going to do is ridicule St. Thomas Aquinas, because he was a figure that requires, his ideas were so strong and so powerful and so impactful throughout history that it requires a thoughtful response rather than just ridicule. So Aquinas was, really his ideas led the day for many, many, many years, up until the Enlightenment age. It was basically, Thomas Aquinas made such an impact in the philosophical realm, where up until the time of Kant and David Hume and some of these, skeptical philosophers of the Enlightenment age, you were not considered really an intelligent person if you didn't believe in God, because of Thomas Aquinas, because of his contributions, and because of Anselm and some of these other, philosophers. But primarily Thomas Aquinas. He is like an anvil in the history of natural theology. And so, even today, you find philosophers, they call themselves Thomists, and that's basing their philosophy on St. Thomas Aquinas. I gotta move this over. It's like wobbling. Nope, that didn't fix it. Okay. So this was Thomas Aquinas' formulation of the argument. So premise one, what we observe in the universe is contingent. And I'll talk a little bit more about what contingent means. But contingent means that it didn't have to be, and its cause is ultimately the result of something else. Okay? Premise two. A sequence of causally related contingent things cannot be infinite. So causally related, the chain of this, like dominoes, this causing this, causing this, causing this, causing this, the chain can't go back for infinity. Premise three. the sequence of causally dependent contingent things must be finite. Therefore, there must be a cause in the sequence of contingent causes. All right. Next formulation of the argument was by a guy by the name of Leibniz. He was another philosopher. He was basically the founder of calculus. So if you ever have to take a calculus class, you can blame him. And he formulated the argument this way. Anything that exists has an explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or in an external cause. Premise 2. If the universe has an explanation of its existence, that explanation is God. Premise 3. The universe exists. Conclusion. Therefore, the universe has an explanation of its existence from premise 1 and 3. Conclusion 2. Therefore, the explanation of the existence of the universe is God. Premise 2 and conclusion 4. Or conclusion 1, point 4. So it's a different formulation of the Thomistic. They're very similar to each other. Some apologists prefer one over the other. William Lane Craig tends to favor this Leibnizian cosmological argument, but both of these are not. They're different in the sense that this third one's a little bit different because it's talking about a cause of the beginning of the universe. Okay, so these ones are just arguing that if something exists, it can't be the result of this infinite regress of contingent causes, or it has to have some ultimate explanation. It can't just exist on its own. It has to have an explanation for its existence. This third formulation is the one that most people use today, and this is called the Kalam cosmological argument. It was popularized by William Lane Craig in recent times, but it goes back to an ancient philosopher, an ancient Muslim philosopher by the name of Al-Ghazali, and he was a big fan of Thomas Aquinas. And so this formulation was really kind of not talked about, but then Craig brought it up, and he's been debating people and all around the world, goes to major academic universities, and he wrote his PhD on this particular argument, on this particular subject. And so it goes like this. Whatever begins to exist must have a cause. So the emphasis in this argument is the universe beginning to exist. So whatever begins to exist must have a cause. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. Conclusion, therefore, the universe must have a cause. All right. So those are the arguments. We're going to focus on the Kalam cosmological argument, but we will definitely touch on the premise 2 of the Thomistic cosmological argument.
What was the Kalam guy's first name?
I don't know.
Oh, you just said it.
Al-Ghazali? I don't know how to spell it.
Or what was the last one of the Muslim philosopher?
Al-Ghazali.
Oh.
Yeah.
Got it.
Okay. So, define necessary being, contingent being, and non-being. So I'm going to ask you guys to talk about this in your slides. So, necessary being. We started talking about this at the beginning of class. A necessary being is a being that cannot not be, meaning its non-existence is impossible. There are certain things that are impossible to exist, and there are certain things that are impossible not to exist. So an impossible thing would be, an example of an impossible being would be a married bachelor. Why would a married bachelor be an impossible thing?
Not be married and a bachelor.
Right, because by definition, a bachelor is an unmarried man, and if you're married, then you're not a bachelor. It's just, by definition, it's impossible. What about, a square circle? So there are certain things that cannot possibly be. So, and likewise, there are things that cannot not be, just like logic. We talked about logic at the beginning of the course. We talked about how the laws of logic, the justification for particularly the law of non-contradiction is the impossibility of the contrary. It's impossible for the law of non-contradiction to not exist. And so, likewise, it is impossible. Yes?
Is that this, for this question, I hear this a lot. Can God make a rock so big that it can't move it? Would that fall into the same category?
Right. It would be impossible for there to be okay. We did touch on this subject. It's a good question. Because it brings up, this is what is called the omnipotence paradox. God's so powerful he can do anything. So can't he create a rock so big that he can't lift it? And it's bringing up a paradox, but the paradox implies that doing something illogical is even a task. That's the error in the question, because a logical impossibility is not a task at all. It's really just an incoherent combination of words. You're talking about an irresistible object and an immovable force and an irresistible object coexisting simultaneously. It can't happen. And so, can God make a burrito so hot that he can't eat it? Is my favorite formulation of the omnipotence paradox. But no, I would say that no, it would be against God's very nature to violate logic, because the logic is inherent to his nature, and so an illogical task would not be a task at all. It's just an incoherent combination of words. So a necessary being is a being that does not owe its existence to anything, okay? Or doesn't have to. I mean, it could, but its existence is necessary. But it could be necessary and, there's this whole issue about Platonic forms and coexisting with God. You guys know what a Platonic form is? Plato believed that there were that everything has an abstract thing associated with. So this phone, there's an idea behind this phone. This chair, there's the physical representation of the chair, but then there's the non-physical idea or the property of chairness. That is an abstract property. And that there's a whole world of abstracts out there, and there's the whole debate between Plato and Aristotle was whether the abstract object is something that we're born with and we have inherently, and that's how we know, or whether the form exists within the thing. And so a lot of Christian philosophers argue again. There's this whole debate about whether God can coexist with abstract objects, and logic would be like numbers and math would all fit into that category. And so some people say that they don't actually exist, that they're useful fictions. This is called fictionalism. And then there's, I'm getting way beyond, sorry. But yeah, sorry, I'll refocus. Okay, so a necessary being is a being that cannot not be. Okay. Next is a contingent being. A contingent being is a being that did not have to be. Okay? So its existence would be ontologically, it would owe its existence to something ontologically prior to it. It would be made by something else. So that's contingent being. So do you guys get the difference between non-being or necessary being and contingent being? Jonas, are you a necessary being or a contingent being? You are a contingent being. Okay, good.
I thought we're necessary beings. I'm really confused.
Okay, so a necessary being, it's hot in here. Could somebody figure out the AC before it turns into 90 degrees like it did 2 weeks ago? So, necessary being,
Like, can you give an example of each? What's a necessary being?
okay, a necessary being, I give the example of logic. It's the opposite of an impossible being.
Okay.
So think about this. A married bachelor is an impossible being.
Yeah.
It cannot be.
Okay, but this is the opposite.
A necessary being cannot not be. Its non-being would be impossible.
So, as an example of that would be.
Logic.
Do you have another example?
God.
Like, okay, God. Okay.
Yeah. So there are not many examples of
Yeah.
this, the idea of a necessary being, but the concept of necessary being is very important for you to understand when we're talking about this and when we talk about the ontological argument, because it's grasping that the best example is that it's the opposite of an impossible being. A necessary being is the opposite of an impossible being.
But
Is
a
there-
contingent being would be like a butterfly.
A butterfly, this cup,
Would be a caterpillar.
pretty much everything we
Oh, yeah.
experience, right? I mean, this computer, this desk, this church, you, me,
Everything else.
yeah, Rod Walter's glasses, that pizza, it didn't have to exist, right? Either it could have existed or it could not have existed. And if it exists, it's always the result of something else. Does that make sense? Okay. So, and then non-being is a state with zero ontological status. No being, nothing, nada, nothing, right? Not even time or space, nothing.
Is there such a thing?
Well, there could not be, no, because there's God, right? But the reason non-being is important that you fully understand this is because people genuinely believe that the universe came from non-being. And so Aristotle said that nothing is what rocks dream about, and it's not within our experience. We do not experience nothing. Non-being.
I feel like a rock is a non-being.
Yeah, but a
Oh, I
dream
guess
of a
it's
rock.
contingent because it came from something.
Right, a rock is contingent, but do rocks dream?
It's nothing.
Right. Okay, so, all right, good. We good on the definitions? Because if we're not, we're going to be confused later. Feel free to say if you want to explain it again, because this contingent being this is necessary. The idea of a necessary being is a difficult concept if you've never heard of it before. It's the opposite of impossible being. Okay, it cannot not be. It would be impossible for it to not be. Okay. All right, next one. Define the law of causality. So the law of causality basically says that every effect must have a cause. So he just pushed the pizza. That was the cause. Well, the effect. We saw pizza box, fly across the table, and we know even if I didn't see the effect, I knew that there had to have been some effect, or some cause for the effect, right? And that's really what science is all about: is trying to find causes. We're looking at the effects of the world, and we are attributing causes to the effects that we see, right? Yeah. Okay. So, defend the law of causality. So this is going to be that's an easy slide. Just say the law of cause and effect. Law of causality is that every effect must have a cause. Now I want you to defend the laws of causality. So you want to explain the argument that suggests the law of causality is analytically true. So if something's analytically true, it's not something that it's something that's true by way of analysis. It's true by way, really true by definition. So what is an effect? How would you define effect without looking at your paper? What is an effect?
Something that causes something else to do something.
That would be a cause.
Something because of something.
Right. Something it's an event, right? An effect is an event that happens because of something else, right? By definition, it's an effect is something that was brought into being and it was caused. Basically, you could define an effect as something that was caused. Well, what's a cause?
Something that caused the effect.
Something that produces an effect. That's by definition what the thought implies, right? A cause is something that produces an effect. All right. So this idea. So now with those two words, the definition of those two words, we put it together. Every effect must have a cause. It's true by definition. It's like saying, why is a triangle an object with three sides? How do you know? How do you know that that a triangle is an object with three sides? Prove it. Because it is.
The shade with the
Triangles, three.
by definition, it's like
It's by definition, right? It's not just how we define it. It's what the idea is. Okay? So it's true by definition. It's analytically true. It is, in effect, it is an extension of the law of non-contradiction. That every effect must have a cause. Now, why do you think that matters to this particular subject? What are we going to be talking about? We're considering that the subject is cosmological arguments.
The universe having a cause.
The universe having a cause. Okay, so this is definitely important, right? Understanding this idea that every effect must have a cause, right? So let's go back and look at premise one, right? To the cosmological argument. It says whatever begins to exist, that's an effect, must have a cause. Okay? So central and, essential to this premise one is this idea of every effect must have a cause. So, okay, next slide is explain why it is impossible to travel through an enumerated infinity. So I'm kind of giving you these concepts and then I'm going to put it all together. Okay, so we talked about the concept of necessary and contingent and non-being, right? We talked about the law of causality. Every effect must have a cause. Now we want to talk about this idea of the impossibility of traversing an enumerated infinity. So what does it mean to traverse? No, travel through, right? If I'm going to traverse through something, I'm traveling through, right? Enumerated, what does that mean?
Numbers?
Sequential, right? Like links in a chain, right? And infinity, what's infinity?
Forever.
That which has no end, right? It's, yeah. Okay, so can you count to, Jonas, can you count to infinity?
no.
Is it possible?
No.
What if you had all the time in the world? Could you be at the end of infinity?
If I have infinity time, I could.
But would you ever get to the end?
No.
No. Okay. Do you? Okay. So why is that true?
Because it doesn't have an end.
By definition, it has no end. That's what the concept implies, right? Infinity is an idea of a thing which has no end, right? So let me ask you this, Jonas. Can you count to zero from negative infinity? No? Why?
It's the same like from 0 to infinity.
It's 0 to infinity. That's the exact same distance, right? You're just, counting backwards, right? So, okay, now think about that. Think about that. Because this is one of the strongest philosophical, this is one of those really powerful philosophical arguments. I make arguments based on science and I make arguments based on philosophy, but these kind of arguments, these philosophically impossible, it's like one of the strongest punches that you can give. If it's impossible to travel through a sequence of that's infinitely long, let's think about how this relates to the origin of the universe. Okay? If an infinite set has no end, correct? An infinite set, by definition, has no end. Now is the last event in all moments prior to now. This moment, right here, now. We are at the end of all moments before. Right? Does that make sense? Okay. If the sequence of events prior to now was infinite, would we ever get to now? Why?
Because there's no prior.
Not because there's no prior, but because
Beginning.
oh,
There's no now.
you can't
Traverse through.
traverse through infinity, right? For the same reason you can't count from negative infinity to 0, you cannot travel through an infinite set of events that lead to this moment right now.
What? Sorry.
Is that, so,
Way over my head.
okay, let's do it on the board.
Not the now part.
Okay, so you've got A and B. And you got a line between A and B. And we'll call B now. If there was an infinity number of events between A and B, would you ever get to B? No. But here we are at B. So that means the past is not infinite. Big thought. Okay. Okay, so this gets into this whole issue of actual infinites. So there's another issue. So there's the issue of traveling through infinity. There's also an issue about the existence of an actual infinite. And this is one of those, debatable ones, the existence of an nobody debates that. That's, about as clear as mud. Or as clear as could be. Yeah. But, yeah, no. But you can't do that. But, there are, if you watched William Lane Craig's video, he talked about the Hilbert Hotel. You brought that up at the beginning. And that was to refute the idea of there being an infinite set of, anything. And some people say that there could be, because William Lane Craig makes that argument, and I talked with J.P. Moreland, who I know is a Platonist. I know he believes that he believes in the existence of Platonic forms. And if Platonic forms exist, there would be an infinite number of them, because there's an infinite number of numbers. And if numbers actually exist in an abstract sense, then what about Hilbert's Hotel? That was one of my, these are the questions that I only get to ask people when they come to, I think about these questions, they bother me and they keep me up at night, and then when J.P. Moreland comes to town, I go, okay, well, there you go. So he basically said that he believes that there could be an actual infinite set, but not an infinite set that's instantiated. That all the logical problems that William Lane Craig brings up have to do with adding and subtracting from infinity, not infinity just existing as a set. So just know that there's arguments against an actual infinite, so they're strong, but the arguments come into play when you're adding and subtracting from an actual infinite. If that confused you, don't worry. Focus on this. This is important. Because now that we read this, now that you Does anybody want another second explanation of this?
Can you do one more?
Yeah,
I can
yeah.
ask you about the last one.
Okay, one more. You cannot count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 and get to infinity. Because by definition, infinity is that which has no end. Okay? So you can't travel through infinity and get to the end because infinity is by definition that which has no end. So you can't travel through that which, you cannot travel through to the end of that which has no end.
You just keep going
Yeah.
forever.
Right. You would never achieve the final destination of infinity because there would always be something else.
Yeah.
Right? Because by definition, it's that which has no end. You can't get to the end of that which has no end. We here are at the end of all events prior to now.
Yes.
So if there was infinity before now, we would never get here.
We never get to now.
We would never get to now because it would involve traveling through that which to the end of that which has no end. Here we are at the end of all moments prior to now. If the number of moments prior to now was infinite, we would never get here.
And this is significant because this means that there was a beginning.
Yes.
That's all to establish.
And even more so, look at Thomas Aquinas, because Thomas Aquinas is, go back to the front page. Thomas Aquinas' argument doesn't really talk about the beginning of the universe. His argument doesn't imply that there has to be a beginning of the universe, but look at what it says. Premise 2, the sequence of causally related contingent things, causally related, meaning this causes this, which causes this, which causes this. You know, I marry my wife, we have kids, which causes our kids to do that, and then, all the events of history, or, I mean, even before humanity and before, life, you have swirling atoms or whatever, you cannot sequence the causes back for forever because of that.
So there's no such thing as something that is half infinite, like infinite in one way but not in the other.
Half infinite. New thought. Well, you get into all sorts of logical problems when you start dividing or adding, subtracting. When you start doing math with infinity, it leads to logical impossibilities, which is why, if you want, if William Lane, we'll talk about, this gets at that whole issue of the impossibility of there being an actual infinite because it leads to logical absurdities. And I'll show you a video that will explain why that is.
So wait.
Yeah.
Does infinity exist or doesn't it?
Jesus.
Well,
That's
okay, hold on. Infinity in what sense? So, see,
the
no,
sense of an infinite being.
okay, infinite in power?
Infinite in everything. Infinite things.
Infinite things? Well, okay, so this goes back to my question with J.P. Moreland. Because J.P. Moreland, I'm like, well, what is J.P. Moreland? Because that thought kind of comes up when you start thinking about like the existence of actual infinites. Because William Lane Craig, he goes through this whole Hilbert's Hotel thing, and I'll show you a video.
Is that his reason why infinite is?
Yeah, they're arguing why an actual infinite can't exist.
But that means God is an infinite being.
But, okay, so, you know what? Let's just watch. I feel like at this point I've confused you guys enough, but I've given you enough. I've covered enough that it's time to watch a video. Okay, so we're gonna watch this Doug Powell cosmological argument. I think I have it. No, it's better on here. So we'll do this. We'll go to YouTube.
There's an infinite number of things. There's no such thing as now.
Okay, well, first off, there's two, okay, let me I can at least alleviate this confusion. There's a difference between traveling through the argument that you can't travel through infinity. That's one argument. And then there's a second argument that an actual infinite set can't exist. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Those are two separate arguments. The second argument,
But if an infinite
Going back to, I hear what you're saying. Going back to my question to J.P. Moreland, which is relevant to this, because J.P. Moreland says those arguments for the second argument, that an infinite set can't exist, only come into play with things that are instantiated that are not existing in the abstract, but existing in a real form. Okay, and
As in time.
So
as in any things, you can't, where you have the potential of adding and subtracting. That's impossible. But he said that you could have a set of an infinite set that's not instantiated. I don't know if that helps clarify, but God is not an infinite
Like a
he's not a numerical infinite. He is one infinitely powerful being. But the question is, does he have an infinite number of thoughts? That's why I kind of side with J.P. Moreland on this, this issue of,
For practical terms, we're just trying to establish that God is outside of all this, therefore he created the cosmos, and we're really trying to...
We're trying to establish premise 2 of the art. Well, we'll get into this, but yeah.
I think this should be like a quick yes or no. Okay, so those people. Okay, so we're going over this, and then pretty much it's like this way of working in my mind. So that's that. Let's just say there is an infinite number of things, whatever. Then there can no such thing be it. There cannot be such a thing as a present, as a now, because there's no such thing as now, because
Wait, what? No.
Well, if
You're
you're
saying if there
following
is
that-
an infinite or there's not an infinite?
if like
Okay,
if
don't-
someone says that there is the infinite number of
Does anyone really
Okay,
believe that?
hold on. Let's phrase argument. All right. Argument 1.
Because the idea of people say, well, the universe always exists.
yeah.
You can't travel. So can't.
So that goes back to this, which is impossible
Infinite by definition.
by definition.
So we're trying to dispute that the universe always
what is infinite times 2?
Huh, so there are people who
That's
believe
that's the thing.
Yeah, there's people that believe that the universe always existed.
Well, even scientists say that there's something at the end from the beginning that happened. So those people are just.
Theological.
That's it.
So that's why I don't
I think you'll finish my words.
Sorry.
No, no,
So,
That's
I hate when people do that to me.
It actually is
No, no,
not.
it
it's
could be
great.
infinite in one
I was
direction.
gonna
No, it can't.
Because it's not infinite in whole.
By having an end, by having a noun, he's proving that it's not infinite.
Because of
It's
the
not infinitely
because of
whole.
the definition of infinity. If
Exactly.
there was such thing as half
But
infinity,
there's
the
not.
definition.
This is like I just made a definition.
Okay. So from now on, we will make sure that we don't confuse these two arguments. Okay. There's argument 1 and argument 2. Argument 1 says you can't travel through infinity. Any question about that one? Okay. What's your question? Or what? Or you just need another explanation?
I don't get how it's like you can't, if it's infinite, you can't be in the now. Like, why wouldn't the now be like halfway through? You know what I mean? Like, if you're counting to infinity, obviously you can't.
I think that's what
Okay, but
You're still counting one, two.
That's what Emily's saying.
See, that's what
Yeah.
I'm saying with the infinite.
What?
We could be at a time in infinity.
Yeah, but
So they're looking at it as a spectrum of infinity, and they're saying, who says that this is the end, this is in the middle? But you're explaining
Well,
that this is the end of
you can't even make sense of end or middle because you're talking about a thing that has no end.
Yeah.
So how can you say when you're halfway through the thing that has no end? Does something that have no end, can it be divided in half? No. So,
So when somebody claims this, we just throw all these questions at them.
Yeah,
Sorry.
like hold on, let me ring up my notes.
But only one of them not.
all right, I'm going to start the video. Hopefully the video will do a much better job than I'm doing right now. Okay.
Yeah, but that's what we're doing right there. We're having one absolute point, and we're traveling plus minus infinity.
No, because
can't
That's
say
what I
absolute
how,
we cannot
to
travel,
have that
but-
point, it
but
shows that we can't be infinity.
Infinity
He's saying
means
have that
no
end
beginning
is saying
and
that
no
there
end.
is no
Yes.
infinity.
Yeah, there's no way to get to now to go.
You can't get through infinity to get to now.
Right.
You can't travel to the end of that which has no end.
It's okay, I got you.
Okay.
It's gone.
All right.
The word cosmos is a Greek word that refers to everything that exists, the universe itself and everything in it. The cosmological argument for the existence of God tries to show that because anything exists, there must be a God who brought it into existence. In other words, without God to create it, nothing would or could exist. It's possible for God to exist without the universe, but it's not possible for the universe to exist without God. Thus, the cosmological argument tries to show that the universe is not a necessary being. This means that the universe relies on something for its existence. It's contingent and therefore cannot account for its own existence. The goal of the argument is to show that the universe was caused by an agent that is not part of the universe, has no cause itself, and is personal. There are several kinds of philosophical cosmological arguments, but we'll focus on what is called the Kalam argument because of its forcefulness and because understanding it often helps understand the others. The Kalam argument tries to show that the universe is not eternal, that it had to have a beginning, and that the beginning was caused by a person. Although this argument was first formulated by Christian philosophers, it was not until the medieval Islamic thinkers devoted attention to the argument that it found its full force. Kalam is an Arabic word that can be translated talk or speech, though it means something closer to philosophy or theology. The argument hinges on three sets of alternatives. The universe either began or had no beginning, either it was caused or uncaused, and if it was caused, the cause was either personal or impersonal. At the core of the argument is an understanding of the difference between a potential infinite and an actual infinite. Potential infinites are sets of numbers that are continually increasing by adding another number to the series. For example, the seconds on this counter are potentially infinite. Once the count began, a set of numbers was generated and will increase until we move on to the next point. If we never move on, the seconds will potentially accrue forever. But no matter how long we let it sit here and add up, the number will never get so big that it turns infinite. There will always be a finite number that we can add another increment to. Actual infinites are sets of numbers to which no increment can be added, since by nature of their infiniteness, the set includes all numbers. There's nothing to add. If this is hard to imagine, there's good reason. Actual infinites do not exist and cannot exist in the physical world. If actual infinites did exist in the physical world, we would see absurdities and effects we literally could not live with. For example, here we see the Earth rotating around the Sun and the Moon rotating around the Earth. Which is happening more often, the Moon going around the Earth or the Earth going around the Sun? Clearly the Moon makes more rotations around the Earth. Now, if the universe was infinitely old, which would make more rotations, the Moon or the Earth? The answer is that they would be equal. They would both have made an infinite amount of rotations. Even though the Moon has made 12 times the number of rotations of the Earth, they've made the same amount. It's an absurdity that cannot exist in reality. Or let's say you had a CD collection that was infinitely large, and each CD had an infinite number of songs on it. If you listened to one CD, you would hear as much music as if you'd listened to all of the CDs, an infinite amount. And yet those infinities are of different sizes, a nonsensical notion. Let's say there were only two artists in your CD collection, Bach and the Beatles, and that every other CD was by the Beatles. This would mean that you had as many Beatles CDs as you would Beatles and Bach CDs combined. They would both be an infinite number. And would the number of Beatles CDs be odd or even? It must be one or the other, but to speak of infinity in such a way is irrational. If this makes your brain hurt or is confusing at all, then you're beginning to understand why actual infinities do not exist in the real world. The examples are not just interesting brain teasers or puzzles. The fact that if x equals y, then x cannot also be 12 times greater than y is extremely important. You would never want to cross a bridge, ride in a car, or live in a house designed by an engineer who didn't recognize or didn't care about the absurdities of actual infinites. This demonstration of the non-existence of actual infinites is important to us in two real-world areas, time and causality. The best way to show that time is not infinite, that it had a beginning, is to observe that there is a now. If now exists, then time cannot be infinite. To show this, picture the moment now as a destination, like a train station. Then picture time as train tracks that are infinitely long. If you were a passenger waiting on the train to arrive, how long would you have to wait? The answer is forever. You can never reach the end of infinity. Thus, infinitely long train tracks cannot ever be crossed. There is no end to arrive at, no station. If infinitely long train tracks could be crossed, they would be the equivalent of a one-ended stick, a nonsensical notion. In fact, this is the opposite limitation of potential infinites. Just as potential infinites are finite numbers that could never turn infinite, actual infinites could never reach the end of their infiniteness and turn finite. But there is an end, a now. The train did arrive at the station. This means the tracks of time cannot be infinitely long. There cannot be an infinite number of preceding moments prior to the present moment. The past is not an actual infinite. Thus, the universe had to have a beginning. The universe, however, did not cause itself to spring into existence. If it had a beginning, something began it. This is where causality comes into the picture. There is no such thing as an effect that was not caused. You are an effect of the biological process caused by your parents. These words you now hear were caused by my using my voice. The current state of the universe is an effect caused by various astronomical and physical conditions. But notice that each of the causes mentioned are also effects. For example, your parents are not only your cause, but they are the effects of their parents, who were the effects of their parents, and so on. But, as the non-existence of actual infinites shows, the chain of causes cannot regress forever. The train station in this case is made of present causes. Because we have causes now, there must have been a beginning to the sequence. Thus, there must be a cause that is not an effect, an uncaused cause, or first cause. Since the universe had a beginning and is an effect, it must have a cause itself. At this point, there are only two options. Either the cause was personal or it was impersonal. Let's think about what this uncaused cause would look like. The first cause would be non-contingent, meaning that its existence depends on nothing but itself. If it was contingent, then it would simply be one more effect in the chain of causes and effects. It must also be transcendent. This means that the cause of the universe must exist outside of and apart from the universe. And because this being exists apart from the universe, it must be immaterial. If it was material, then it would be part of the universe. The first cause would have to have the power to create the universe. Without this ability, nothing could be created. But these things are not enough to bring the universe into existence. There also needs to be a desire to create, a will to make the universe. Without this will to create, nothing would be created because the power to create could not be acted on. Now add all these things together. What kind of thing relies on nothing for its existence, exists apart from the universe, is immaterial, has the power to create something from nothing, and a will to do it or not to do it? Does this sound like a personal or impersonal being? Personal, of course. The ability to will is an attribute that belongs only to persons. Thus, the Kalam argument brings us to the conclusion that the universe had a beginning that was caused by a personal, powerful, transcendent, self-existing, immaterial being. In other words, God. A question that frequently arises at this point has to do with God's infinite characteristics. If there's no such thing as an actual infinite, then how could God be infinitely good or loving? When we speak of God's infinite characteristics, we are speaking in more of a metaphorical manner. We don't mean that God has an infinitely large quantity of goodness and love with which he funds his grace and mercy. We mean he is the ultimate embodiment of goodness and love. These characteristics are without measure and speak to the quality of his character, not the quantity of his characteristics. But philosophical arguments are not the only kinds of arguments that demonstrate the universe had a beginning. There are scientific arguments as well. The second law of thermodynamics, for example, is often used as an illustration. However, the best and most easily understood example may be the Big Bang theory. In the 1920s, astronomer Edwin Hubble discovered that our universe was bigger than previously thought. In fact, it was much bigger. Until he saw outside our galaxy, the prevailing thought was that our galaxy was the entire universe. Hubble was the first to recognize that ours was only one of a vast amount of galaxies. While he was studying light from distant galaxies, he found it was not what he expected it to be like. He noticed that the light was uniformly shifted to the red side of the spectrum. This phenomenon became known as the red shift. Hubble found an explanation for the red shift by applying the Doppler effect. The Doppler effect says that if sound or light waves are emitted from an object moving towards you, the waves are compressed or shortened. In the case of sound, the shortening of the wavelength increases the sound's pitch. The farther away the object is as it moves towards you, the shorter the wavelength and the higher the pitch. As the object is moving away from you, the sound waves are lengthened and the pitch shifts lower. The Doppler effect is what describes the change in pitch you hear in sirens from ambulances. As the ambulance gets closer to you, the sound you hear drops towards its natural pitch, and as the ambulance gets farther away, the siren drops progressively lower than its natural pitch. Hubble applied the Doppler effect to the light waves he was studying. The blue end of the spectrum is composed of the shorter wavelengths, while the red end is composed of the longer ones. Everywhere he looked in the universe, he saw a shift in the light towards the red end of the spectrum. This meant the stars emitting the light are all moving away from each other. Thus, the universe is expanding. Other scientists took this discovery and built on it. If the universe is expanding, it must have had a beginning, a point of origin from which it was expanding. Other discoveries were made that show the expansion is slower now than it was when it began, like an explosion. This explosion became known as the Big Bang, the beginning of the universe. The two primary challengers of the Big Bang theory are the steady-state theory and the oscillating theory. The steady-state theory argues the universe has always existed and always will exist. There are two problems with this. It doesn't account for the observations that support the Big Bang, and it would require the existence of actual infinites. The fact that there is a now makes the theory of an infinite number of preceding moments an impossibility. The oscillating theory says that the universe will eventually stop expanding and contract back to a singularity, which will then explode and continue a cycle that will repeat forever. The problem is a cycle of oscillations without beginning or end would require the existence of actual infinites. But since we exist in the current oscillation, there must be a start to the cycle. The other problem is the second law of thermodynamics. The energy in the universe is not infinite. Just as a rubber ball bounces lower and faster with each bounce until it stops, an oscillating universe would eventually run down. Again, an oscillating universe must have a beginning. The Big Bang remains the best explanation for the current state of the universe. But if the Big Bang was an explosion, why did it explode? What exploded, and where did it come from? Explosions are effects, and effects need causes. They don't cause themselves. The cause of the Big Bang is not to be found in the physical universe because that's precisely what exploded. Also, the matter that exploded didn't create itself. The non-existence of actual infinites shows that matter cannot be eternal. So, because the universe had a beginning, something must have initiated it. It did not start itself. The cause of the universe must be found outside of the universe. It must be transcendent. The cause must be powerful in order to create the universe out of nothing. The cause must not be an effect because it's an uncaused cause. And this cause must not rely on anything else for its existence. It must be non-contingent or necessary. Note that this only describes what's necessary for the Big Bang to work. But if there is such an entity as the one described, it's still not sufficient for the creation of the universe. Just because this entity does exist doesn't mean that the universe must exist. Something is still missing: intentionality, a will to make it happen. A car that has a working engine, a healthy battery, a properly connected electrical system to start the engine, and is full of gas has all the necessary conditions for running. Yet parking lots are full of cars that have the necessary conditions to run but aren't running. Although they have the necessary conditions, they lack sufficient conditions. Cars that are moving down the street have the necessary and sufficient conditions for running. That's why they're moving. What do the moving cars have that the parked cars don't? They have drivers. And what's a driver? It's a personal being that can act on their will. Thus, the universe needs a driver, a personal, intelligent agent that can choose whether to create the universe or not. This necessary and sufficient cause of the universe is what we call God. It's important to be honest about what the cosmological argument does and does not prove. It does not show that the God of the Bible is the one true God. Remember, this argument is also used in Islamic apologetics. However, the God of the Bible is consistent with the picture of God the cosmological argument describes. If our case for Christianity relied only on the cosmological argument, it would fail. But when we use it in conjunction with other arguments, it is a powerful component of a persuasive case.
Okay, did that help clarify a little bit? Okay. All right. So, okay, where were we? Okay, so we talked about, just kind of want to review, we reviewed the Thomistic cosmological argument, the Leibnizian cosmological argument, the Kalam cosmological argument. We talked about the difference between necessary being and contingent being and non-being. And I thought of something when we were watching the video in response to Jonas's question about why does the cause for the universe have to be a necessary being? And it goes back to this issue of you can't have an infinite set of contingent causes. And unless there was a being with the power of being, nothing would ever be. That's what I should have said when you asked that question. Unless there is a being with the power of being, a necessary being, nothing would ever be. Because you can't get an uncaused effect. This kind of goes, I'm kind of jumping ahead, but down at the, if you look at, where did I talk about that? That's the R.C. Sproul thing, yeah. So, yeah. Oh, actually, that's where we're going right now. So, okay, so, I'll get there. All right. Okay, but unless something has the power of being, unless there's a being that has the power of being, nothing would ever be.
But something, an uncaused cause, something that has no cause, doesn't it automatically have to be infinite because it has no cause?
Well, so an uncaused cause would have to be infinite.
So God is infinite.
Right.
Yeah. And then the universe.
And necessary.
The universe, just in a way of room, like not in a way of time or anything, isn't infinite.
In the way of room?
Yeah.
No, it's not, actually.
So
It's expanding.
At some point there's like a wall.
There's a point where there's no space and no time. Space is expanding. The universe itself, space-time is expanding. That was actually what Hubble discovered, is that if it's expanding, it's not infinite. Because if it was infinite, there would be nothing for it to expand into. At some point, there was nothing. No space, no time, no matter. What? Well, okay, when I say there was nothing, I really mean there was just God. There was no space, no time, no matter. That it's actually, the Big Bang is not matter moving out, it's actually space expanding.
So God is the only infinite thing.
Right. But infinite in a different sense than what they're talking about. Although there again, like I said, when I talked to J.P. Moreland, there's some debate. There's some debate about this one with respect to God. Okay, because God, in J.P. Moreland's mind, God has an infinite number of thoughts called Platonic forms. These Platonic forms exist as ideas within the mind of God, and there is an infinite number of them. But they're not instantiated, so all this, adding and subtracting and stuff that, you find in the examples don't apply, because they're not instantiated. Okay?
That means in the Bible, God says, my ways aren't your ways, and my thoughts aren't your thoughts.
Yeah, well, when we start talking about God and time, time is a mind-boggling thing. Infinity is a mind-boggling thing, and God is a mind-boggling thing. And here we are putting them all together in one conversation. So it's there's, your confusion is justified.
To be very careful when we talk about nothing, because there is
Right, there is no such thing as nothing.
Because some people say, I hate life, and then commit suicide and go into nothing.
Right,
Forget it. It's
right.
not gonna
There's,
work.
yes, nothing is outside of our experience. So,
What does light have what was the first cause for light? God.
Genesis 1.
Yeah, okay.
God said, "Let there be light,"
No, yeah.
and
What's
said it was
the
good.
thought, but it was like,
Okay.
because if, how fast can God travel?
God can't travel because he transcends space. So asking where God is, or where
He's omnipresent.
yeah, asking where God is or where God can go is like asking when God is. It's beyond. He transcends. He's of a higher order of being
So
than
you have to be
than
careful
location.
You're talking about God the Father or God the Holy Spirit can be immanent. God the Father is neither immanent. He cannot be in the world. He cannot
All
be
of them,
out the world.
all of them can be immanent. They can be both immanent and transcendent. That they are one being. And so while God can be present with you in a different sense, He's present everywhere in an infinite sense, because He transcends location. Right? Just because in just like what we said, how time separates now and then.
But
Past separates here and there.
location in how many dimensions?
Well, we're talking about all dimensions. He's beyond dimensions. Dimensions would not apply to God because when you talk about a dimension, you're talking about a spatial location. But God, here and there are not meaningful terms to somebody that transcends space. Now and then is not a meaningful term to somebody that transcends time. So it's a very,
Unless you're talking about God the Son. You see,
well, yeah. Unless you're talking about God the Son as a human, but still applies to God as God the Son as a man.
Without the Trinity, you're going to bother. God the Father is transcendent. God the Holy Spirit is immanent. God the Son is incarnate, logos. So
That's
so
not
there is
necessarily
no
true.
contradiction, There is no.
No, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit are all transcendent. They're all immanent, and only God the Son as a man is in
No, the problem because the Bible is very clear. No man has seen God. Which they're talking about God the Father. God the Son can be seen. God the Holy Spirit.
yeah. You have to. Okay.
What did Isaiah see when he saw holy, holy? What did he see? He saw
Right, but you also have to ask, like, in what sense did they see him? In his full sense,
Okay.
and are they seeing his? You're getting into theology involves splitting some hairs, and that one involves splitting some hairs, yeah. So okay, let's we got to finish this. Okay, well, hold on. So we're here at R.C. Sproul. Okay, so this is the appropriate time to talk about what I mentioned before. So the way R.C. Sproul addresses this issue in his series Defending the Faith, basically he presents 4 possible options that could potentially account for the world that we see. And he says that there are only 4 options. There's not a 5th option. If you look at the world and you want to talk about the explanations of the world, there's 4 possible ways of explaining the world. 1, it's an illusion. 2, it's self-caused. 3, it's uncaused. Or 4, it's caused by another. And so his whole book analyzes those different things. And he hammers out, and so you have multiple competing hypotheses. There's only 4 possibilities. You knock out 3, and you're left with the last one. So the first one is refuted the idea that the universe is an illusion. We had mentioned this before about Descartes' argument for self-existence. I think, therefore I am. Remember, I can't doubt the fact that I'm doubting. If I'm going to doubt anything and everything, I can't. If there's one thing I can't doubt, it's the fact that I'm doubting. Because if I'm doubting that I'm doubting, I'm doubting. And if I'm doubting, I'm thinking, because doubt is a thought. And if I'm thinking, I must exist because I am the one doing the thinking. And so, you can deny the reliability, you can doubt the reality of the external world maybe the Cartesian demon that Descartes talked about, is causing you to perceive things that aren't actually there. But the one thing you can't possibly doubt is self-existence. So for sure, maybe the world is an illusion, but definitely you're not. You cannot deny the reality of self. And so that means that it's not an illusion. Okay? You are not an illusion. So that refutes the first one. Second one is self-causation. This violates the law of non-contradiction and the law of causality, because something cannot exist in order to bring itself into existence. And so okay, something that causes itself to be, you would have to exist in order to bring yourself into existence and not exist in order to be brought into existence. And that would be a violation of the law of non-contradiction. And then uncaused being, you can't have the universe be infinite because of this. This is the Thomas Aquinas' can't traverse, the sequence of causally related events cannot be infinite because you can't travel through infinity.
To be uncaused would make it infinite.
Right. To be uncaused would make it infinite. Okay? And so the universe, or reality itself, must be caused by another. And so that's, if you can kind of remember that line of reasoning, it actually is, it's a way, Rod's always looking for these practical, what can I use? Give me stuff I can use. And if you get too deep, I can't use it. This is pretty basic. All right, next one. Explain the Kalam cosmological argument. So, wait, no, are we there? Yeah. Okay, so premise 1, whatever begins to exist must have a cause. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. Conclusion, therefore the universe must have a cause. And the conclusion follows logically from the premises. When you use logic, and guys, if you guys have not been to City College and you need to go to college, guys, please do yourself a favor and take a logic class. Do it at a time when you're not taking any other hard subjects, because it's a really hard subject. It's like lifting weights with your brain. But you should be, logic is something that I believe every Christian should have some training in. You're going to have to, if you go to community college, you have to take a philosophy class anyways. You might as well do logic, because logic's going to fit that category, and you're going to be just really helped by it. But one of the things that's true of logic is if it's presented in a way where the premises are valid and it's set up according to the rules of logic, the conclusion is forced and necessary. So if I say that whatever begins to exist must have a cause, the universe began to exist, it follows necessarily that the universe must have a cause. And so, in order to deny the argument, you have to deny one or more of the premises. And so you either have to deny that every effect must have a cause, or you have to deny that the universe had a beginning. And think about that. Both of those are pretty basic things. Right? It's well known within mainstream science that every effect, or that the universe began to exist, and the idea of something beginning to exist needing a cause is fundamental to. I mean, that's a very basic thing that all of science is based on. And so, you look at those two things, put them together, and you have this argument for the existence of God. It's really powerful. It is the number one talked about argument with regard to the existence of God. In philosophy journals and all this, stuff that people write on this particular subject, it happens to be the most talked about subject. So, on your slides, I'm going to want you to defend the first premise with the law of causality. So whatever begins to exist must have a cause. And basically, the effect of something coming into being must have a cause, and this is related to the law of causality, which we talked about as being analytically true. Because what's a cause? Or what's an effect? What's the definition of effect?
Something that had a cause.
And what's a cause?
Something that leads to an effect.
Right. And so it's not just, when I say it's true by definition, it's not just true because that's how we defined it. It's true because that's what the thought implies. Okay? Self-causation is logically contradictory, and see above. And really, when you talk about something, you know, like the universe coming into being, it's worse than magic, because at least with magic you got a rabbit coming out of a hat. At least you have the hat, right? Okay? We're talking about not just a rabbit, but the whole universe, not just coming out of a hat, but out of nothing, non-being. And you know, it is to deny premise one is absolutely preposterous. And when Dr. Craig first started his, you know, he wrote his, you know, PhD on this, and really, again, he was the major person to popularize this particular argument in the academic realm. Even though this goes back to Aquinas and, you know, the medieval philosophers. He said that when he first started off, he thought that he would be defending premise 2. And so all of his efforts was on premise 2, but he was just shocked that people would actually be denying premise 1. That premise 1 is the area that, you know, most people tend to level their attacks against the argument. So, and part of it comes from this idea of quantum physics. And basically what, you know, I, you know, must admit that I don't know very much about quantum physics. I've looked into this, and quantum physics is extremely confusing. And, you know, I actually have a video that I want you to see about quantum physics, because before we even talk about quantum physics, I think that this particular video hits at a very important point. Where did I put it, though? That's the question. There it is, right there. Okay. Nope, that's not it. That's the other one.
Quantum physics says at subatomic level causality breaks down in anything, in which case science wouldn't have a leg to stand.
Right. So basically, yes. So basically, so quantum physics studies the small, the smallest the smallest particles that make up the universe. You have atoms, and atoms are made up of subatomic particles. And, you know, these subatomic particles called quarks, they behave in ways that defy our normal methods of inquiry. And there are all sorts of interpretations of the way they're working, and some of the interpretations imply that they would deny logic. Okay, and the law of causality. You have these, they seem to be lose locality. The experiments that are done on them are, you know, they perform in bizarre ways, and they seem to come in and out of being from nothing. And so the argument would be that there are lots of things that people use with quantum physics, but one argument is that the universe was a result of this quantum fluctuation. And they would, you know, when you watch debates with atheists, they argue along these lines that basically that they would say that nothing is unstable, that you know, that you would have to have, just like in the small realm where we see these quarks coming in, these subatomic particles coming in and out of being, that the universe came into being from this quantum fluctuation at the subatomic level, and it exploded and got big, and it brought in all the matter and energy of the universe into existence. And so people use this also to deny logic. This is popular among New Agers. You know, when you listen to who's the guy? It's on Oprah. No, not Dr. Phil. The Deepak Chopra. Yeah, you know, he'll talk about, you know, quantum physics and how, you know, you know, when you get into like the New Age stuff, they're all into this, and you know, this idea that, because New Agers believe that all that is one, and all dualities are actually an illusion, and that, you know, we all have our own perception of reality, which is ultimately an illusion, that the only thing that exists is God, and you know, that you become enlightened when you recognize this fact, and you know, yoga is to, you know, yoke with the oneness of the universe, and you know, and so they're you know.
How do you argue with someone that thinks that way?
Well, yeah, it's you go back to lesson number 2.
Well, is that what, like, not even having a referee on the
Right. Yes.
So you're pretty much.
Yeah, they're the hardest people to talk to. But it also applies to the atheists, because they're talking about the law of causality coming into play. Because they're denying the law of causality based upon the behavior of these subatomic particles. So I want you to listen to this Coco video. You want to hit the lights?
There's a question about how quantum physics influences the arguments for the existence of God, because according to some, what we've learned in quantum mechanics seems to cast doubt on the reliability of the laws of logic. And if we use the laws of logic to give evidence for the existence of God, and the laws of logic are not somehow reliable, then that means our arguments aren't reliable as well. So a couple of things here. First of all one has to do is say the phrase quantum physics for just about everybody to run for cover, because there's kind of a rhetorical play here that has been called blinding with science. That is, if you throw enough complicated scientific jargon out there regarding an idea, the more complex and confusing it is to the layman, the more persuasive it is. It almost sounds like, boy, he must really be right, because he knows so many complicated things about the issue that I don't even understand. And there's a sense that we have to beware of that. That just because there's a lot of science thrown our way does not necessarily mean that the point has been made, especially if we don't understand the details. We can't just give the benefit of the doubt to the person with the complicated jargon. Secondly, when it comes to quantum physics, as many quantum physicists have said, virtually nobody even understands that kind of stuff. It is strange, it is unusual, it is weird. Which means, by their own admission then, we should be careful about making dogmatic assumptions about the interpretation that some give to the equations. And in fact, there are something like 10 different possible interpretations to the equations of quantum physics. That is, how do these equations actually map themselves out in reality? And only one of them, the so-called Copenhagen interpretation, is the one that calls into question, as I understand it, these issues of the laws of logic. So that might be one interpretation, but it isn't the only one that has to be accepted. But there's another problem that's deeper, because if it calls into question the laws of logic by which we verify other things, like the existence of God, it calls into question those same laws of logic by which we verify anything. Even the ideas of quantum physics. I mean, think about it. One of the laws of logic is the law of identity. A equals A. Or another way of putting it is, a thing is itself and not something else. A thing is identical to itself. Now, it seems so commonplace as, why would we even mention such a thing? But notice what it does for us. It means that when we talk about a particular thing, that thing is distinguished from everything that it's not. It gives us the ability to individuate things. Now, if that law of logic didn't apply to some particular topic, we could never know what it is we're talking about, because the referent, the thing we're talking about, could be jumping all around to different things if the law of identity doesn't apply. Which means then, if the laws of logic don't apply in virtue of quantum physics, we can't even talk about quantum physics, because quantum physics isn't a specific thing. It could be this and then jump and be something else, because the law of identity doesn't apply. Notice also the law of non-contradiction. A cannot be not A at the same time and in the same way. So applying this to, say, God. God cannot be personal and not personal. He's either personal or not personal. There's no other alternative, given the law of excluded middle. Either A or non-A. So these two laws work together. But notice how they also work with quantum physics. If we want to say that quantum physics is true, that the laws of logic don't apply, then they won't apply to the laws of physics, which means we can equally say that the laws of physics are not true, in the same sense that we're saying they're true. So this just leads to absolute chaos. Knowledge would be impossible if the laws of logic don't apply, and if they don't apply, they'd even undermine quantum physics. So I think this is a dead-end enterprise, but it's the kind of thing that gets Christians unsettled when smart people with a lot of religious jargon take a shot at their theistic point of view and their theistic arguments based on the sophisticated understanding they have of quantum physics. And they don't even realize that their arguments undermine their own view. So it's a classic case of suicide.
So we want to address this claim that quantum physics refutes premise 1. So the claim is that subatomic particles, basically at the subatomic level, the law of causality doesn't apply, and so you don't really need this external cause for the universe. You have these quantum fluctuations, and that is the explanation for how all of space, time, matter, and energy came into being from nothing. All right? It was a quantum fluctuation. So, a couple things to be said. One is, when you look at quantum physics and we observe these particles coming in and out of being, are they coming in and out of being from nothing? The answer is no, because they're coming in and out of being in space. Space-time is not nothing. Space is a sea of bubbling energy. There's, all sorts of things going on within space. And so to take the claim from observing quantum fluctuations within space to say that that's the explanation for the whole universe from absolutely nothing, that's not what we're observing. And you can't apply it to that. So you have surges of energy in empty space. You have no surges of energy in nothing, because nothing is non-being. All right? We're not just looking for the origin of matter. It's space and time that came into being. And that is the part that is, particularly the time, because then you get into the philosophical problem. And I'll get into explaining that. So outside of time, so this goes to response number 2, no change can occur, because time allows for the distinction between now and then, right? So if there is no now, or if there is no distinction between then and now, past, present, and future, there's just a block of now. No, you can't have change. Change is impossible outside of time. So you can't have fluctuations outside of time, because that's a change, and change requires time. next one, next response, and guys, I can't be certain. There's certain things that like I present, I'm really, really confident on. These are, this is my response. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to make sense to me that there couldn't be a fluctuation outside of time, because time is outside of time. You're talking about a changeless state. Next thing is, the law of causality is analytically true. You can't use science to disprove what you learn from logic. This likewise with quantum physics. You can't use science to disprove logic, because logic is a priori. It's known before the sense experience. And so there's this disconnect that comes really from the radical empiricism. We talked about that last week. We live in a day and age of radical empiricism where people don't even think this way. They don't recognize that they're making a mistake when they try to use sense experience to refute logic. It's absurd. Next thing, and this is kind of. This is also this is a major point. So, if the cause for the universe, so we're talking about this fluctuation. I mean, we aren't really talking about without a cause. We're talking about a fluctuation that is just, it's not provoked. But think about this. If the cause for the universe was this impersonal set of necessary and sufficient conditions. Remember we talked about the necessary and sufficient conditions in the video with the car? Remember the car? The car has all of the necessary conditions existing in order for it to drive, but it doesn't, because it doesn't have the sufficient conditions. So if the necessary and sufficient conditions existed prior to the universe in a timeless, changeless state, then the cause could never exist without the effect. Because if whatever is bringing whatever fluctuation or whatever it is, if it exists outside of time, it exists as an eternal state. And if it existed as an eternal state and the necessary and sufficient conditions were both there, you cannot have the cause without the effect. And the example that I give to explain that would be, if it's always been below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, then the water will always have been frozen. You will not have the water freezing from liquid state into a frozen state. It will just always have been frozen. You cannot have the cause and the effect. You can't have the cause without the effect if it was from an eternal state.
You wouldn't have a cause or an effect, because
You can have an eternal cause from an eternal effect, but you cannot, if the necessary and sufficient conditions both exist in an eternal state, then you cannot have the cause without the effect. They would always both be existent. They would both be permanently present. That's really the main, that's like, one of the main dismissals of this idea. That there could be, one, you're talking about fluctuations in a timeless state. And two, you're talking about necessary and sufficient conditions existing in this timeless state without the effect. You can't have that.
Basically, you're saying the cause and the effect always go together.
Well, if it's outside of time, because we have to really kind of think about what it would be like if there was no time. It's really a mind-boggling thing. You would have no distinction between now. What?
Then you get off into the infinite thing again?
I'm saying the cause and effect would be indistinguishable.
You can't have one without the other.
They would be the same thing.
No, it's not that they would be the same thing. You just couldn't have one without the other. So this might be helpful. We see life as a train of events, right? It's like we're on a parade, or like we're here, like think of the Rose Parade. We're seated right here, and it's going this way, right? And you have the present, okay? And you have the past. And then you have the future, it's coming. Okay? This sequence for us in time is a moment-by-moment sequence of events that allows for change. But at a point that transcends the whole thing, say a helicopter above the parade, it's all just a now. And the parade's not even moving. I mean, I don't know if that's a clumsy example, but you have to think that central to this is the idea, is comprehending the idea that outside of time, there's no change. So you're talking about an effect. An effect is something that happens. It's a momentary bang, there it is. You know, once there was no universe, and now there is a universe. Okay? Whatever would bring, whatever state, whether it's quantum fluctuations or anything, you're talking about it going back to a timeless state. You're also talking about it going back to a changeless state. And that's the philosophical thing that the people who believe in pretty much what all the atheists are saying. That's what they're not grasping. And this is like a huge point. So like I hope you get it. I hope you're not just like, wait, what's he talking about?
That timeless state,
like,
changeless state is God?
Well, outside of time, God is changeless. Okay? So God would be changeless. But here's the thing. So, all right. I don't want to jump ahead of my notes, but it's super important that you understand that if the cause for the universe was an impersonal set of necessary and sufficient conditions that existed prior to the universe in a timeless, changeless state, then the cause could not exist without the effect. That's like a big point. And so they're talking, what they're implying is they're implying that there was a set of conditions prior to time that fluctuated and brought a change. Okay? But if whatever necessary and sufficient causes that could have been there from nothing, which is absurd, but if we can even postulate there being necessary and sufficient conditions outside of time in a state of nothingness, if we could even grant them that, you couldn't have, if the necessary and sufficient conditions existed before time, then you can't have the cause without the effect.
You're saying the effect would be unavoidable. God can choose, but in this case there isn't a choice.
Think of the 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay? The fact that if you have water and a state of it being below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, water will freeze. Right? So if you have the necessary and sufficient conditions for water freezing, from all eternity, what do you know about the water?
It's frozen.
It's always be frozen. Can you ever have the water not frozen with those necessary and sufficient conditions?
No.
No. So in the same way, if you have if we grant them the necessary and sufficient conditions for all of the universe coming into being from nothing, that's a huge, okay, I'll give you that one just as a gimme, you still can't explain how you are going to have the cause and not the effect. The effect would be with the cause. If the effect is permanent, if the cause is permanent, the effect would be permanent. You wouldn't be able to separate the two because the water would always have been frozen. It wouldn't be freezing. There wouldn't be any moment where it froze. It just always was frozen. Okay? All right.
Nothing. So you're describing some sort of conditions to nothing.
Right. That's the other absurdity, which I'm not, Right. So, but when you start talking with, when people start talking quantum physics, they do say that nothing is unstable and that you have these fluctuations and what?
Nothing is stable and everything is unstable.
Well, I'm just repeating phrases that I heard. I've seen enough debates to know that this is what they say. That But this is actually let's go ahead again. No, you know what? I'm gonna save this one for later. No, we'll watch it now.
Now, as the cause of space and time, this being must be an uncaused, timeless, spaceless, immaterial being of unfathomable power. Moreover, it must be personal as well. Why? Well, first of all, because this event must be beyond space and time. Therefore, it cannot be physical or material. Now, there are only two kinds of things that fit that description. Either abstract objects like numbers or an intelligent mind. But abstract objects can't cause anything. Therefore, it follows that the cause of the universe is a personal, transcendent mind. Secondly, how else could a timeless cause give rise to a temporal effect like the universe?
This is what I'm talking about.
If the cause were an impersonal set of necessary and sufficient conditions, then the cause could never exist without its effect. If the cause were permanently present, then the effect would be permanently present as well. The only way for the cause to be timeless and the effect to begin in time is for the cause to be a personal agent who freely chooses to create an event in time without any antecedent determining conditions. And thus we are brought not merely to a transcendent cause of the universe, but to its personal creator.
But the cause hasn't got to be God.
Well, remember I gave an argument for thinking that this cause is timeless, spaceless, immaterial, enormously powerful, and personal.
I think it's a computer.
Well, that wouldn't, computers are designed by people.
No, this is a self-designing computer.
Timeless. Well, that's a contradiction in terms.
Why is it time? What's contradictory about it?
A computer has to function, it takes
no, this is a special computer.
Yeah, but it has to be logically coherent.
Oh, it's logically coherent?
Yes, you have to be logically coherent.
This computer is amazing.
No, besides, it would have to be, as I said, a personal being. A computer is a physical.
Not this computer.
This is at a major academic university.
Is what you're calling a computer is really God. A non-physical, It's just another word if you rob it of all the attributes that make it a computer.
Surely Gates is God.
I don't know about. Most people don't say the computer thing. I mean, I think that was kind of that's been. Oh, sorry. He could have been more articulate. Yeah. But if you watch Lawrence Krauss or some of these other guys, and you talk about these debates about the universe, they do talk about nothing being unstable and quantum fluctuations, but there's still this philosophical problem of you can't have change without time, and you can't if you have the necessary and sufficient conditions existing in a timeless state, you can't have the effect divorced from the cause. If the cause has always been there, the effect will always have been there, and you won't get a beginning to the universe. You won't get any, a moment where it was and then became. It wasn't and then was.
So no Big Bang.
Right. You for philosophical reasons, not scientific ones.
I finally got it. That's what he said. If the cause were timeless, the effect would be timeless.
Right. You cannot divorce it. Yes. If one is permanent, the other is permanent. If they both exist, because nothing's changing in a changeless environment, right? You're you know,
So you'd have no beginning.
But the universe does change, right?
because there's time.
Because
But outside of time, there is no change. So if you're talking about
look at the universe outside of time, there is no change to the universe, meaning there is no change in cause because God is the cause.
Before time began, there was no change. Yes. Now that there is time, there is change. Without the universe, no change. It's a changeless. It's a changeless. Before time began, there was no change. So again, if you are talking about a state where there was no change, and you're saying that the necessary and sufficient conditions existed such that it could bring a universe into existence, whatever those necessary and sufficient conditions are, whether it be quantum fluctuations or whatever, doesn't matter. You're talking about them existing for all eternity, because nothing changed to bring them into existence, right? The necessary and sufficient conditions would have always been there, and therefore the effect would have always been there.
Yeah.
And so that's the problem with this that's the biggest problem with this quantum physics argument.
It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense. And you can talk, science jargon, that's why I wanted to show the Coco video, because he does a good job explaining of this blinded by science. And, people do that. When you start talking with people, they will throw enough unfamiliar terms at you to the point where they've won the argument because they know more vocabulary than you. And, you can get around the science stuff with the philosophy, because the philosophy prevents it's a philosophical problem, is what we're looking at. We're looking at, the problem with what their statement is not scientific, it's philosophical in nature. All right, so hopefully you can do something to explain that. Yeah. Okay, next one. Defend the second premise with the philosophical and scientific evidence. So, guys, you may want to rearrange your slides and not necessarily in the order that I have it. You might want to present the traversing enumerated infinity here. That's okay, however you want to do it. So premise 2 is that the universe, so okay, let's recap, because I kind of went off on all sorts of different ways. I want to bring you back. The Coulomb argument is this: whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. Okay, we talked about premise 1. Okay, premise 1 is the law of cause and effect is analytically true, and there's this whole idea of, the universe coming into being from, fluctuations, quantum fluctuation. We went off on that for a while. Now we want to talk about premise 2, which says that the universe began to exist. We talked about that when I went through the problem of traversing an enumerated infinity. The reason we know that the universe can't be infinitely old is because it's impossible to travel through infinity to get to now. Now is the end of all moments before now. And so because you can't travel through an infinite number of moments or events to get to now, we would never have gotten here. But here we are. Now, right? And so because we're here now, we know that the sequence that led to this moment was not infinite. It had to be finite. Okay. Next one. Scientific evidence. So I have a whole video on that. I don't know how long it is, and we're running out of time, so maybe I don't want to show it. Maybe I'll show it after and let you guys go if you want to, or we can show it afterwards. There's some scientific evidence. The main evidence would be the second law of thermodynamics. Basically, the second law of thermodynamics says that the amount of usable energy is running down. And because it's running down, it's like a car that's running. What do you know about a car? Let's say you go to a parking lot and you see a car that the engine's on. What do you know about the engine? What do you know about the car?
Hasn't been on forever.
It hasn't been on forever, right? So if it's got a limited amount of fuel, it's running and it's running down. So that's basically what the second law of thermodynamics says. So if it's running down, it had a beginning. Then there's this whole idea of the universe expanding. And I talked about that a little bit. It's not that matter. So Edwin Hubble was looking out at the stars, and he discovered that there are other galaxies besides ours, and that those galaxies are all moving away. Everything's expanding. In every direction you look, all the galaxies we see are expanding away. So if they're expanding outwards, that means at some point it couldn't have been expanding for forever, right? So you rewind the tape, you have a beginning, right? Einstein basically discovered that the universe was expanding when he was developing his, all of his equations, general relativity, and he fudged the numbers because he didn't like the implications of what he was discovering with physics. And then later Hubble's discovery caused him to go and check to see for himself, and then he admitted that he had fudged the numbers because he didn't like the implications of the universe having a beginning. And there's a really good quote that I want to include in here next time. I just need to remember it. But basically, it was one of those, really good quotes by a scientist who basically said along the lines, we've scaled the mountains of ignorance, we've climbed to the highest peak, and when we reach over that final rock, we are greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries. I forget who said that, but it was a good quote. I'll have to remember to include that in this lesson next time. But they discovered what the Bible said all along, that in the beginning. There are several places throughout the Bible that talk about time actually having a beginning. So you have the red shift. Another thing that confirmed it scientifically was this thing called radiation echo. Some scientists were working on these instruments, and they thought the birds were messing up their instruments, so they cleaned out the birds, and then there was this background hum that wouldn't go away, and they discovered that it was background radiation, and that the explanation of the background radiation was the effects of this initial explosion. It's another proof for the right. It's another proof for the origin of the universe, and we'll talk. That's the purely scientific evidence for the beginning of the universe. So, I like the philosophical evidence because I think it's stronger. Because it's more certain. You cannot travel through infinity. It's impossible. It's not just likely to be the case. It's actually impossible to do. You can't, it's impossible for the universe to be infinitely old. Philosophically impossible. And so, I personally, when I explain that, I very rarely even go into the scientific stuff. It's the philosophical, I think, carries a heavier punch. But our views are within the realm of mainstream science. It's really funny because, so much of this view of Christianity is that we're off on the fringes within the rest of society and what, modern discoveries have found. But in reality, we are within the bounds of the mainstream of modern science, particularly with regard to the origin of the universe and the fine-tuning of the universe. Yes?
We live in a rational universe created by a rational God who places that rationality within our reach in terms of sight. Does that sound good? If there was no God, there would be no rationality, there would be no sight.
Yeah, I think Lewis said something along...
The philosophy.
What?
Science kind of confirms the philosophy that you're talking about, backs it up.
Yeah, the science, in this particular instance, you have this philosophical argument goes all the way to Al-Ghazali in the Middle Ages. All right? And now science is confirming what, what philosophy and theology has said all along. And so anyways, all right, we got to draw some conclusions here pretty quickly. Okay, so what inferences can be made about the cause for the universe? So I played that video by William Lane Craig, and he made the claim that that this argument not only shows that there's a cause, but that the cause must be personal. What do I mean by personal, as opposed to impersonal?
As you said, impersonal would be number.
Okay.
But he willed it.
Well, okay, willed it. That's really so personal. So my even though Siri's on the other end, my phone is actually impersonal, right? There's no this cup is impersonal. Okay, it's something, not someone. Okay, so what this argument implies is that the cause, so whatever begins to exist must have a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe must have a cause. The cause must be personal, and here's why. The cause must be ontologically prior. Well, okay, hold on. Backtrack. There's a lot of things that you can imply about the cause. One is that it must exist prior to space, time, matter, and energy. So to think about that, if it existed prior to space, it would transcend space. So here and there are, it's beyond the level of here and there. The cause would be timeless, so it's beyond the level of now and then. He created all matter and energy, so he would have to be more powerful than all the matter and energy in the universe. So you're talking about omnipresent, all powerful, and eternal. Those are attributes that are consistent with our knowledge of God. And then this is an important point, this idea that matter and space had a beginning, therefore the cause must be immaterial. This is important because a lot of people believe that God is matter and energy, the pantheists. So you run into those guys on the street, the New Agers who believe that the universe is God. Well, the universe had a beginning, therefore the cause must transcend matter and energy and must be an immaterial, all-powerful, omnipresent, changeless, beginningless, uncreated being. Because you can't be created. If you're eternal, you're beginningless and uncreated. And so, yeah, that covers that whole section. Okay, next one. Explain that the cause must be personal and not impersonal. So there are two different arguments for this. So the first has to do, and both of those were in that video that I showed. The first has to do with the fact of what kind of thing could exist beyond space and time. That whatever cause, it would have to be not material, eternal, and in a timeless, changeless state. So there's only two kinds of things that could exist in such of a reality. Abstract objects like numbers and the property of chairness, the Platonic form of the chair, or the Platonic form of the perfect circle, or the Platonic form of goodness. These abstract concepts, or an immaterial mind, namely God. So those are only two. So there's only two things. If you have a third one we would like to add to the list, be my guest, but as far as I can tell, there are only two things that could exist outside of time and space, and it's abstract objects and a mind. It can't be an abstract object because abstract objects have no causal power. That's what it means to be abstract. And so because it can't be an abstract object, it's got to be a mind. Okay? So then that's the first argument. The second argument is from the type of causation. So there are different kinds of causes. you have event causes. I push Chris and he falls into the video camera. Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. And then the video camera falls, right? His falling was the result of my pushing, right? So event causation. One event causes another event. There's also state-to-state causation. And so think of the ice cubes freezing. The state of the water being, the temperature being below 32 degrees causes the state of the water being frozen. So you have event causation and state-to-state causation. Neither one of those are sufficient for the cause of the universe because you can't have events outside of time, because without time it's changeless, and there is no state because you're talking about nothing, right? So it's neither one of those work. The only other option is agent causation, that the cause for the universe is a mind with a will. And like in the video, it described a man who's sitting for all eternity, and then because he has a will, he can choose to stand up. And God, for all eternity, existed without the universe, and then chose to bring space, time, and matter into being. An act of volition, will. And so, able to choose. So, that's the argument. So this argument makes the case for theism. And it refutes all non-theistic views. So, real quickly, I want to address the objection that God would require a cause. So, when you talk to atheists, they'll say, well, if the universe has to have a cause, then what about God? Doesn't he have to have a cause? The response to that would be that the law of causality does not say that everything that exists must have a cause. Rather, it's that every effect must have a cause. So it's that universe coming into being, that's the effect that requires the cause. But God himself, being an eternal, timeless state, would not require a cause. And he does have a cause. His cause is within the necessity of his own nature, because he's a necessary being. He cannot not be. That's the ontological cause for his existence. And again, you don't have to have an explanation of an explanation in order to recognize that it's the best explanation. So this would lead to an infinite regress, because if you needed to have, in order to know anything, you would have to have an explanation of the 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 explanation, and on and on and on. And so if you always needed an explanation of an explanation, you couldn't know anything. And that would destroy science. And so, all right. Last thing, and then I know we're over time, but not too far. Okay, in summary, the cause is eternal, meaning outside of time, beginningless, always existed, changeless, uncreated, immaterial, enormously powerful, and personal. Meaning he has the will and the ability to act on his will. So, when you think about worldviews, this is one of those, this is a major part of our case for our worldview. You've got a couple different questions, and these are either-or questions. Does God exist? If you say no, you're an atheist. If you say yes, you're a pantheist or a theist. If you say God is personal, the next question, is God personal? If you say no, you're a pantheist. If you say yes, you're either a deist or a theist. And then the next question is, has God been active in his creation? If you say no, you're a deist. If you say yes, you're a theist. Up until this point, We have eliminated all the options but deism and theism. And next week, when we talk about intelligent design, we will give evidence that God has acted within the universe through the creation of life. I'll pray. Father, I just thank you so much for just being amazing. And God, the heavens declare your glory. And God, we're just, what are we, that you are mindful of us. And we start thinking about your eternal state and your immense power. It's just too wonderful for us. And God, we just are in awe of you, and we want to glorify you. And God, please help us to do that. And pray for this week that it would go smoothly, that the guys would get their homework done and do a good job. And that you would continue to equip me to do this and do this faithfully. I love you and thank you so much. In Jesus' name, amen.